the life of Gorbachev was in serious jeopardy. The coup eventually failed, but on returning to Moscow, political power had shifted from the Politburo to modernizers such as Yeltsin. Gorbachev resigned and never made a successful return to Russian politics. Raisa Maximova, Gorbachev's wife, died of leukemia in 1999. They had one daughter, Irina. Although unpopular in Russia for his perceived role in the breakup of the Soviet Union, he remains an influential voice. Although he had previously supported Putin, in 2011 Gorbachev criticized his third term as Russian president. He was also critical of the democratic deficit in the 2011 elections. Gorbachev has also warned that in Russia, politics is increasingly turning into imitation democracy with all the power in the executive branch. Gorbachev has also warned against a new Cold War and argued that America and the West need to be careful in interfering in Russian affairs and Russian spheres of influence on issues of economics. He has called for a new perspective on economic issues, arguing the 2007 financial crash showed the limitations of the Washington Consensus on Free Market Economics. Gorbachev has also founded the Green Cross International, one of the principal sponsors of the Earth Charter, a movement to encourage greater concern for the planet and environment. We desperately need to recognize that we are the guests, not the masters, of nature, and adopt a new paradigm for development, based on the costs and benefits to all people, and bound by the limits of nature herself rather than the limits of technology and consumerism. Gorbachev has officially stated that he is an atheist. However, at the same time, he has been open to religious influences. He has admired the life of Saint Francis of Assisi,
Pope John Paul II, and cultivated a friendship with Indian spiritual teacher, Sri Chinmoy. Speaking of his own beliefs, he said,
"I believe in the cosmos. All of us are linked to the cosmos. Look at the sun. If there is no sun, then we cannot exist. So nature is my God. To me, nature is sacred.
Trees are my temples and forests are my cathedrals. M. Gorbachev, nature is my God."
What did Mikhail Gorbachev do to change the world? When Gorbachev came to power in 1985, there was a very real threat of nuclear war. The Soviet Union and the US were at loggerheads, and the rhetoric of the opposing leaders left no doubt about the bitter ideological divide between East and West. In the Soviet Union, the Communist Party had maintained a totalitarian grip on the country ever since the revolution of 1917.
In 1985, there seemed no hope for the vast power and reach of the Communist Party to be challenged, let alone transformed. Gorbachev was a committed socialist,
but he was also interested in the truth, and from his own career in the communist bureaucracy, was aware of the Soviet Union's limitations. After the Chernobyl disaster of 1985, Gorbachev's resolve to reform communism began in earnest. His ideas of glasnost and perestroika were truly revolutionary. Glasnost involved openness and moves towards individual freedom and openness. It was Gorbachev who sought to free political prisoners and allow greater press freedom. He also started the transition to a market economy. The changes that Gorbachev initiated began to snowball, and Soviet satellites in Eastern Europe gained a taste of freedom. Previously, attempts at liberation in Eastern Europe had been met with Soviet tanks and Soviet repression, but when borders started to crumble in the late 1980s, Gorbachev was not willing to use force against his own people. Some say the grip of Soviet communism power was weaker, but it was weaker because Gorbachev was a different type of leader. In foreign policy, Gorbachev frequently surprised the West at the intensity and urgency with which he urged nuclear disarmament and an end to the arms race. This was despite some belligerence on the behalf of President Reagan. At the start of the 1980s, Reagan referred to the Soviet Union as the evil empire, but after a few years, even this staunch anti-communist saw Gorbachev was different. UK Premier Mrs. Thatcher famously remarked, "This is a man with whom we can do business." The end of communism, the freedom of Eastern Europe, and the end of the Cold War may all seem inevitable with the benefit of hindsight, but a different leader may not have been willing to allow press freedom and move the economy towards democracy. It was not just Gorbachev who ended the Cold War. Other figures played important roles. Pope John Paul II, Reagan, Thatcher, Kohl, and many ordinary people of Eastern Europe, who literally smashed the Berlin Wall. But Gorbachev, more than anyone else, was the crucial piece of the jigsaw. It was only through Gorbachev that the grip of communism slipped and changed the world more than anyone in the 20th century. Mikhail Gorbachev initially welcomed President Putin for offering some stability after a period of turmoil. However, he became increasingly critical, especially of Putin's wish to censor the Russian people. Despite offering support for the annexation of Crimea in 2014, Gorbachev was said by a family friend to be deeply upset by the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, which severely undermined his life's work. After a long illness, Mikhail Gorbachev was pronounced dead on 31st August 2022, aged 91.